Let's go. We're going to take it back, way back, back to the Homo sapiens. And let's figure out why my people and your people survived, but some other people didn't. Let's check out this video real quick.
Around 74,000 years ago, the Earth was shaken by one of the largest volcanic eruptions in its history, Toba. A column of ash rose dozens of miles into the sky, blanketing the atmosphere and triggering a global volcanic winter. Temperatures plummeted, climates collapsed, and the population of Homo sapiens may have dropped to fewer than 10,000 individuals on the edge of extinction. Long ago, there were days when a whole tribe sat close together, by fading fire trying to stay warm inside a cave, unsure if anyone would still be alive in the morning. Mothers with no milk left chewed soft roots to get water for their babies. Fathers...
I know it's hard back then. I mean, I don't know if I can handle that. I mean, a lot of people probably gonna say, yeah, I can. But they had to go through everything. No technology, no medicine, none of that. Can you survive?
Walked many miles with blunt stone tools just to trade for a little dry fur to make a fire. And over everything, there was silence, the silence of dead forests, starving animals, and gods who no longer answered. But that wasn't the only time humanity came close to vanishing. Around 130,000 years ago, ice began to creep from the poles, marking the start of the Weichselian glaciation, a cold age that would last nearly 100 millennia. Those in Europe, Central Asia, and Siberia faced brutal winters, famine, and waves of extinction. And in Africa, life wasn't easier. Drought cycles in the Sahara shattered migration paths, scattering groups into dust before they could cross. Even just a few thousand years ago, the Black Death tore through Europe, claiming 30 to 50% of the population. Families were erased, villages burned, and yet a few people lived. Those with rare immune traits, those...
They had a heart. I'm trying to tell you. Look at that. They had a heart. I mean, our ancestors did survive because we're here, but they really did have it hard.
Moved quickly, those who by instinct or chance stayed just outside death's reach. They didn't just survive, they had children, and they left behind genes. And you here in the...
I mean, you can be suffering and still want to get some. I mean, everybody want to get some, so...
21st century, with your phone, your Wi-Fi, and warm running water, carry within you the fragments of ancient survival. Each fold in your DNA is a chapter of history, written not in ink, but in hunger, frost, and blood. The question remains, how did they survive? Who led them through it? What saved them, and how are you still here? When the sky collapsed, no one ran alone. People gathered into groups, not for strength, but because survival was never an individual pursuit. In the darkness of a cave by the flickering fire, hands held one another without needing words. An elder spoke of a winter 3 seasons past, when the river froze and the pathfinder fell through, never to return. A woman tore her only hide into 3 pieces, meant for a hunter to keep moving, one for a child to stay warm, and one she wrapped around her own breathless body. That kind of love wasn't weakness, it was the sharpest survival strategy our species ever forged. In small tribes with no doctors, no food reserves, and no maps out of danger, trust became the rope that bound fates together. If someone stumbled, the group stopped. If one fell ill, others chewed herbs, rubbed clay on foreheads, pressed hands to chests, not because they believed in magic, but because they knew lose one person and the whole group grows weaker.
I get what they're saying, but I did hear other reports that said they was like tough on other members of their family, but Everybody going to have their own perspective on what happened because we wasn't there. We're trying to get evidence and facts, but we wasn't there.
Ancient rituals were born out of sheer helplessness. They smeared ash on their faces to hide from death. They knocked stones together to drive away unseen spirits. No one ever slept with their back turned to others. These weren't superstitions, they were wisdoms carved from centuries of trial past, not through writing, but through hands, glances, and scars. At the site of El Cedrón in Spain, the remains of a severely ill Neanderthal show signs of long-term malnutrition, but also long-term care. That person couldn't hunt or walk or gather, yet someone kept him alive until the end. In an age when food was barely enough for the healthy, that act can only be called one thing: sacrifice. And it was through sacrifice that humanity outlived disaster. Winds picked up before dawn. The fire had burned out during the night, wood saved for tomorrow. Wrapped in animal hides, the group sat still, listening for distant cracks, maybe ice breaking, maybe stones falling from the slopes, where predators were beginning to stir. In that silence, all eyes turned to one person, the guide. They gave no orders and claimed no title. But when the river changed course, when the herds migrated elsewhere, when the spring dried up before the rains, they were the one everyone followed. Their map wasn't on parchment. It lived in memory, a flat rock, where bees once nested, a narrow pass sheltered from wind, a bitter root.
And that's where we begin our information from. A lot of the stones, mountains, a lot of artifacts.
It only grew after 2 frosts. At La Ferracie in France, archaeologists uncovered a Neanderthal burial with smooth, rounded pebbles, possibly used as directional markers. A hint of symbolic spatial memory, the kind that may have saved entire groups from wandering into a snow maze where all traces vanished overnight. The guide wasn't always the strongest, but they sensed when the wind carried a new smell rot, perhaps. They knew when to be silent. They knew when to stop and dig wind shelters instead of pressing on blindly. One wrong choice meant losing a person. Lose another.
So I get it. It's like learning your environment, just like we would do, during this time. We will adjust. You got to.
And the group couldn't hunt. Lose one more and no one would stay awake by the fire. To survive, someone had to lead. But leadership wasn't about walking in front. It was about making sure no one was left behind. They passed through lands where nothing could be gathered, nothing could be hunted. No one sang at night anymore. The fire shrank smaller each evening, every branch saved like a heartbeat. But amid despair, a small idea caught flame like a glowing ember hidden in cold ash. Someone stuffed dry moss between 2 hides, and the weakest child survived the first winter night. Someone stacked stones near the fire to dry meat, and the group didn't have to hunt during the next storm. These weren't called inventions, but each trick, each quiet adaptation built a wall between life and extinction. Ancestral intelligence didn't strike like lightning. It came in the 5th failed fire, in the 7th bitter root. One person chewed bark while others gave up. At Border Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found stone tools bearing traces of toxic roots that had been heated to neutralize their poison. Not just a scratch on rock, but evidence that someone lived through the risk and remembered how. In the age of ice and ash, humans learned to bend nature's rules. When known foods turned dangerous, they began slow roasting, smoking, and drying. When starvation crept in, they bound tendons into cords to hang meat above mold and animals. When cold locked their fingers stiff, They rubbed fat on skin, slept with warm stones, and whispered survival tricks to the next person without ever writing them down. These details, fur-lined shoes, fire-warmed stones, dried roots weren't museum pieces. They live inside your body today in genes that regulate metabolism, detoxify plants, preserve heat, and prolong survival when food runs out. When the firelight flickered across scarred faces, sunken eyes, and bloodied hands still trembling with life that wasn't a chance, it was intelligence distilled from 1,000 deaths. And all it took was one person thinking differently for an entire bloodline to endure. Not everyone was strong enough to go on. Some children lay feverish, barely breathing. Some mothers bleeding after childbirth couldn't even sit upright. In a moment of crisis, the logical thing would have been to leave them behind. But our ancestors chose something else. They carried,
Just like the saying says, the strongest will survive. And like what they did, a lot of the information that they stored was in these caves. If something happened with us, a lot of our information will be in our homes.
each other through the snow, spooned water into cracked lips, tore the last scrap of food in half for someone too weak to chew. In times like these, love wasn't a feeling, it was a choice. It meant acting every day for someone else's life, even if it meant your own might end sooner. And these irrational acts, again and again, saved the species. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, archaeologists found the remains of a Neanderthal man who had a crushed leg since childhood, one blind eye and a deformed spine. He couldn't walk, hunt, or feed himself. Yet he lived for years, meaning someone kept him alive in an age without medicine homes or surplus. They did it because they knew if I carry him across the river today, someone might carry my child over the mountain tomorrow. This kind of care wasn't limited to wounds. It lived in how they passed on memory stories told by firelight, food saved for elders who remembered old paths, drawings of vanished animals to teach children where danger once lived. And something rare began to happen. Emotions stopped being a burden and started becoming a shared memory. A recent genetic study found that certain variants linked to stress resilience and increased oxytocin, the bonding hormone, may trace back to periods following climate catastrophes. In other words, compassion itself was selected by evolution. The ones who survived weren't always the strongest, but they were the ones who didn't leave each other behind. Not every bloodline made it. Some groups vanished without a trace. Tribes that settled in lands that never turned green again. Lineages passed down for just 3 generations before being buried under ash or ice, never making it to safer ground. Across glaciated Europe, archaeologists have uncovered mass burial sites, adults, children, elders huddled in a single layer with no signs of violence. They didn't fight. They starved.
Man, we live in a good time. A good time. Way better than back then, where we would have to fight for survival most of the time. Now, I'm in the US. I'm not sure exactly what happens everywhere in this world. And I know that this channel goes out everywhere. But I'm sure it's probably better than what they had to deal with. They had to deal with a lot.
Skulls all facing the same direction, as if they had once slept close together for warmth, until the cold won. In our modern genome, there are fragments of sequences that appeared once, and then were gone. Like stray notes in a lost song. The Neanderthals ruled much of Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Some of their blood still flows in us, but their culture is gone. No songs, no myths, no words survived. They crafted tools, hunted in groups, and buried their dead. but something ended their line. Perhaps the climate changed too fast. Perhaps they didn't adapt. Perhaps they failed to connect with others in time. That's the lesson. Survival doesn't favor the strongest. It favors those who adapt, who learn from loss, and who pass that learning on before it's too late. Not every extinction ends in screams. Sometimes people disappear quietly, like a small flame snuffed by wind, and the world barely notices. But you reading these words now are living proof that someone somewhere made the right choice. They found the path through ash. They rekindled fire in a damp cave. They carried the sick on their backs across the ice. And they lived just long enough to give life to someone else.
They were strong.
Inside your body today are hundreds of survival mechanisms refined over thousands of years. Cold resistance genes from those who endured Siberian winters. Lactase persistence from herders in the Caucasus. Malaria resistance from those who lived by the Nile. Genes that boost red blood cell production in thin air, passed down by those who survived at 13,000 feet. Even your unease in darkness, the chill when footsteps sound behind you, the instinct to turn when movement flashes in the corner of your eye. None of it is random. These are echoes of a million near deaths. A warning system passed down from people who once heard a branch snap a second before the
1,000 years from now, that generation is probably going to look back, to our generation and like, dang, they had it rough. Same way we do with them.
tiger leaped. The feelings you call irrational, they're the reason you're alive. Your art, your faith, your culture, they too are survival stories. Symbols etched on cave walls, bracelets made of predator teeth. Stories whispered by firelight passed from one voice to the next. Each one a way your ancestors said, I survived. This is how I did it. You don't have to live through ice or lava to understand this legacy. You only have to listen to your body. Feel the fear when you face the unknown. Sense the calm when you stand beside someone you trust. And remember, these feelings aren't weak. They're ancient maps written in blood, carved from flesh, passed down through time to guide you home.
This has me thinking, like, you just want to thank your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your ancestors, because at the end of the day, it's the reason why you're here.
If your hands have ever trembled in the dark, if you've ever hesitated before stepping into a shadow, if you've ever felt a sudden fear when someone you love was late, then know this: you are moving with instincts that...
I mean, at the end of the day, we here because our past, and we got to do the same thing for our future, their generation, our kids. Just stay locked in. Until next time.